Hello, 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 and welcome to my show, Inner Work for Greater Good. My name is Emily Eldridge. I am the founder of ChangeLight and the creator of the ChangeLight system. ChangeLight is where I teach change makers and mission-driven leaders and anyone with a sense of purpose and mission wanting to really make a positive difference in the world, where I teach you all I'm just adjusting my thing now, inner work that accelerates your power to change the world. That's what I mean by inner work for greater good, because oftentimes we think of inner work as not necessarily having an impact on the outside. At least that's how I think a lot of people do. And I know for a long time, that's how I saw it. I saw inner work as like, it's almost selfish. And self-absorbed and, navel gazing. And like, if I'm working on myself and I'm just trying to feel better, then what difference does that make in the world? And I am here to tell you through this episode and many other episodes that it has everything to do with making a difference in the world, with bringing more light to our world, with impacting people positively, not just by what we do, but by who we are, by how we show up in our lives, in our relationships, in our work, on the street. When someone drops something by accident in front of you, there are plenty of people who walk right on by. But if you're one of those people who really feels called to help and be of service, then maybe you're someone who helps and you pick up that thing for them. I know that's a tiny little example, but my point is, it really is about how we show up in the world has everything to do with the impact that we can have on it without even trying. I actually really love this idea of, and such as idea, it's a reality, that we can actually have an impact without even trying, just by showing up as we are in our full, most glorious, most radiant, most loving, compassionate selves. And the way that I believe that we do that, and the way that I found that I do that, and I help other people to do that, is by doing that within yourself, having that compassion for yourself, having that connection with yourself, healing those wounds, revealing your strengths so that you can truly live and honor and know and actualize your truth. Because when you live your truth, you are shining your brightest light. If this is your first time seeing my show, welcome. But at the same time, I really recommend that you go back to, after you watch this episode, go back and watch the previous episodes, because I lay out in detail the discoveries I've made about what's going on inside, about, the truth about your inner struggles and the three types, the truth about your inner power and the three unique types of powers that you have, the truth about your truth and the purpose of your guiding star in inspiring and in guiding you to live your truth. In this episode, it's almost like I'm backtracking a little bit, but I think you'll understand why I'm doing this. I want to talk about this idea of inner work and why is inner work, or can inner work feel so scary? Okay. Now, mind you, I understand that, you might be someone who's like, oh, I'm always doing inner work. I've done a lot of, meditation, and I've done a lot of therapy, and I've done, other kinds of things to try to understand what's going on inside and really, really heal the wounds of the past, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you might be one of those people, in which case I applaud you. And I would also say that, I wonder if you think back to when you first started, if there was a time back then when actually the idea of inner work scared you, when it was like, oh, I don't know if I really want to look inside, or when it was like the situation you were in almost forced you to have to look within and understand what is it that's going on inside of me that has contributed to, I don't want to say cause, because it's not as though like we are the only ones who cause things to happen, but like that has contributed to, this situation being unhealthy or toxic, or that has caused me to be attracted to this kind of person or this kind of relationship, or that, why is it that I keep having these patterns? And so you may have had experiences in your life that led you to say, you know what, the common denominator here might be me, or, you know what, I'm feeling a certain way and I'm sick of feeling this way, and I got to understand what's going on. So you may have already kind of hit that point where you were like, okay, and you started to do your inner work, or you may be someone who is brand new to inner work, someone who's never really delved inside and really sought to understand yourself. Or maybe you've tried, looked at different modalities, or maybe you've read articles, or you've seen some videos on YouTube or what have you. I mean, we can all sort of dabble. Obviously, with my work, the inner work for greater good, we're talking about pretty deep stuff here. I mean, we're talking about the deep triggers, the deep wounds, the deep blocks, the blind spots, the walls that we carry, why they're there, why they exist. And then ultimately through my ChangeLight system, I teach you how to heal those so that they're not in your way, so that they're not causing you pain. And as a result, often unconsciously causing other people pain, because that's what this is about too. As we heal ourselves, we heal our relationships, the world around us heals. Because as I see it, that's why our world is so wounded, because we are wounded. It's not like the wild animals are internally emotionally wounded. It's not like plants are internally emotionally wounded and they're the ones who are causing us to have all these climate change problems or us to have all these wars. No, who is causing the wars? We are, we humans. Who is having all this conflict in their relationships? We are. Okay, fine. You could argue that maybe they're birds in nests that are having conflicts as well, but they're also not like toxifying our planet. We're the ones doing it. And so we're the ones who need healing in order for our world to heal. That is absolutely vital. And that when we can speak and behave and perceive from that more healthy, centered, whole, wise, aligned with truth space within us, not only does it make life easier, but it also makes it, not only does it make us happier, but it also makes life easier. It's just so much easier when you don't have all those triggers and wounds. So that being said, the point though is that as much as I can sit here and advocate for why inner work is so important, I also really want to stop for a minute after having shared all that inner work type stuff before those previous episodes and really honor the fact that, you know what, it's also can be very scary. It can be really scary to look inside and get really honest with ourselves about what's going on in there, why we're feeling that way, why we react that way in certain circumstances. And really, if someone keeps telling us or people keep telling us the same things like, look, you get so angry, or you know what, you're just, I wish I could just have a conversation with you without you yelling at me or without you falling apart or whatever. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with doing those things. I'm saying that sometimes people can actually reflect back to us things that we need to hear. And that it's, it can be really hard to then stop and go, well, you know what is going on with me? What is really going on inside of me? So I made a list of, some of the main reasons I've found about why inner work can be so scary. And the first one is pretty obvious, because oftentimes we're scared of what we'll find. If we really look inside and we really take an honest, brutally honest, hard look at ourselves, or if we just stop and allow ourselves to feel whatever we're feeling and be present with it without judgment, without arguing with it, without any of those other things that keep us in struggle with it. If we really stop and allow ourselves to turn towards what's going on inside, just that act of turning inwards, turning towards the pain or turning towards the reactions or turning inward can be very hard because we're scared of what we'll see. And a lot of times, part of the reason why we're scared of what we'll see is sometimes it's because we're so identified with whatever's going on inside. In other words, if I'm scared that if I turn inward and I'm going to see a broken little girl who's carrying these wounds from childhood, I may be scared of that because I may think on some level that I am that, and I don't want to be that. And so there could be a part of me that, that I'm like, I don't want to face that because I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to think that that's who I am. And so that can be, for example, so that can be one reason why we're scared to look inwards, because we're scared of what we're going to find. Or a lot of times we're scared of the monsters the monsters that are inside of us. I will say here that when we talk about inner monsters, and by the way, when I first started my work, I call them X powers now, but when I first started doing my work, I called them my inner monsters. And in fact, the first one that I drew out, I've shared this in previous episodes, the first one that I actually drew back in 2009, it looks like a monster. And I call it, to this day, my first monster. It's now hanging in a place of honor in my kitchen because I see what value, how valuable it was for me, what a difference it made in my life. But I called it a monster. And because that's how it felt to me, it felt monstrous. And so a lot of times that's another thing that we're scared of. We're scared of facing what we perceive to be the inner monsters in ourselves. And I think on some level, we think that we are that monster. So therefore, I don't want to deal with that. Let me just loop you in on something here in case it wasn't clear from some of my previous episodes about X powers. What you think is monstrous about you is not. It's not. It's your perception that it's monstrous. But as you actually face and learn about and work with that part, you find that it's actually not monstrous at all. In fact, I recently had a client who drew out a monster, and it was a monstrous inner critic that ripped her to shreds and tore her apart. Sure enough, by the end, it turned into this nice little guy that just wanted to give her advice. It was never a monster to begin with, but it had grown to feel that way because she hadn't fully dealt with it and honored it, or she tried to deal with it, but really it takes sometimes working with someone like me or someone else who can really work with that part for you. So what we think is monstrous inside ourselves is not. But nevertheless, if we think that there's something bad or wrong or awful about us, we don't want to face it. That's not fun. That's scary. So I want to honor that we're scared of what we'll find. We are scared of feeling the feelings. Inner work 9 times out of 10 requires feeling some amount of discomfort or pain. Discomfort and pain are uncomfortable. They are scary. We have a resistance to feeling that way because a lot of times, and I found that unconsciously, this is what happens. We resist pain because on some subconscious level, or even in terms of a visceral body level, we think that something that causes us pain could hurt us or kill us. That's just that kind of primal fear of discomfort and pain, because if our body is sending us that signal of discomfort and pain, oh, well, then it must mean that I'm in danger, or it must mean that I should reject that thing or run away from it. And there are times when that is absolutely the instinct to have. Of course, there are times when that fear or that discomfort or that sense of threat or what have you is very healthy because your life truly might be in danger. But unfortunately, what often happens, though, is that we end up with this aversion to pain. We don't even realize we're doing it a lot of the times. And in fact, for those of you who've seen the previous episodes about X powers, I talk about defenders. Defenders are often that X power that's the one that try to block you from those feelings because they're afraid that you'll feel that, and then you'll feel weak, and then you'll be threatened and all this other kind of stuff. And so the point is, we avoid the pain. We don't want to feel that way. But you know what I have to say, there's a wonderful thing that my mother said years ago. My grandfather was, he had serious pain, physical pain with a hip. So his hip was just getting worse and worse and worse. I think at this time he was in his 80s. He died at the age of 98 a few years ago. But his physical pain was really, really bad. And he'd been avoiding getting a hip replacement because he didn't want to go through the pain, to stop and actually have to have the surgery and have to go through the pain of recovery, et cetera. And my mom finally said to him, Dad, let me ask you, which would you rather have? The pain of getting worse or the pain of getting better? So I want you to think about that when we talk about inner work and we talk about the fear of our own pain. When we do that inner work, yes, it can be painful when we face those fears, when we face those wounds, when we face those monsters, when we face those insecurities, when we face those walls, we face all that kind of stuff inside of us that has formed inside of us as a result of painful experience, as a result of fear-inducing experiences or stressful experiences. It can hurt. But here's the key thing. When we truly face and honor the pain that we feel, the pain that we feel in that moment is not the pain of getting worse. It's actually the pain of getting better. Because what that pain desires and needs more than anything is to be honored. Now, I've had so many clients where they have this crying little child inside of them that they're at war with this child because they're like, I don't want to feel that way. I don't want to feel that way. But meanwhile, what happens? That inner child screams and cries and throws temper tantrums and gets angrier and more insistent and more belligerent because that person has basically tried to suppress it and created a war and a struggle with it. Here's the thing. When we do that, when we struggle with pain, do we make the pain better? No, we make it worse because then it pushes back. So I call this the physics of emotion. It pushes back. That's what it does because it's an energy inside of us. And so it pushes back. However, instead of pushing against it and resisting it or judging it or threatening it or hating it or ignoring it or whatever, instead, if you just release the pressure and you honor it and you face it, that's when the healing can happen. When you can be present with your pain and not judge it or criticize yourself for having it. It's not your fault that you're wounded. It's not your fault that you have pain. Nevertheless, as I often say, it's not your fault that you're wounded, but it is your responsibility to heal for all the reasons that I've listed before about when we carry those wounds, as I say, hurt people, and we don't even realize how we're hurting other people or even hurting ourselves from those places of woundedness and pain. So the point is, a lot of times we're scared to feel the feelings, and yet that feeling those feelings can actually prove to be our salvation and prove to be where the healing really happens. We are scared we're scared to let go of old stories and identities. As you face what's going on inside and do the real inner work, it means seeing those parts of you, not for what you think they are, but what they actually are. Seeing them for what they actually are, not what you think they are. Remember, I talked about that monster inside, and she thought of it as a monster. But the more we listened to it and honored it, the more it calmed down. And sure enough, it was just a part of her that was just trying to have its voice and its advice heard and trying to protect her whatever way it knew. So it's all about sorry, I got distracted a little bit. So in terms of this, the old stories and the old identities and facing what's inside, it can actually mean seeing things as they are, as opposed to what they think they are, which can also mean that some of the stories that we've carried as children, for example, some of the beliefs that we formed as a result of things that happened may not, some of them may absolutely true, 100%, like you were treated that way, or this person did say this thing. A lot of it can be true, but the meaning that we make out of it may have made out of it when we were children may not actually turn out to be entirely true. So sometimes it can mean some of that starts to dissolve. Another thing too is that a lot of times we can be very identified with our victim stance, not even realizing that we are. And I'll tell you what, when I first started doing, I would say really first started doing inner work, was actually well before I discovered this, this technique and these discoveries. And it was back in, I would say, 2001. And I remember I was doing like energy healing and meditation, and I just started really looking within for the first time in my life. And I discovered that as I was starting to face my own pain, that it was bumping up against this idea that somehow other people were responsible for my pain and I could blame them for my pain. And that kept me in a victimized, disempowered place. And as I started to actually take responsibility for my own pain, it was scary. It was hard, because it meant I had to go, you know what, this is my job. to deal with this. Yes, other people may have caused me pain or said certain things or done certain things that caused this pain to form within me. But nevertheless, this pain is still my responsibility. And that by blaming everybody else for my pain was not going to serve anyone, least of all me. And so I had to learn, and it wasn't an overnight thing, but learn that, you know what, that I could no longer hold on to these victim mentalities that I'd been carrying that put me in that disempowered position. Now, I am not saying that we're not victimized. So to me, there's a difference between, yes, we can be victimized. The difference is, how much do we identify with that victimization? How much of our identities do we have entangled, if you will, tied to that sense of victimization and that idea, that sense of our own disempowerment? It's true that at that time, let's say when we're children, if someone victimized us, it's true that at that time we may have been disempowered. We may not have had the ability to really stand up for ourselves and protect ourselves. And that is 100% valid. At the same time, holding on to that story, that identity, while it may be comforting, because it means you're not responsible then, right? It's all their fault. While that may be comforting because it means that we can sort of sit in our little corner and say, well, it's their fault. Their fault I feel this way because they did this to me. And while there may be absolute valid reasons for that, ultimately, in terms of our own inner power and growth, that is not the most empowering stance. That is not the most empowering place to be. The most empowering place to be is to own our own power. Part of owning our own power has to do with facing our wounds, facing our blocks, our triggers, our blind spots, our walls that are getting in the way of us owning it. And so it requires, from where I sit, it requires going to those dark places with those victimized children, or those parts that are victimizing those children inside, the inner bullies, etc., and really honoring that pain and really allowing those parts to heal and feel validated and heard, and to transform back into their original essence, so that rather than approaching the world, a lot of times unconsciously, approaching the world from this place of, well, there's nothing I can do about it, and no matter what, I'm going to get hurt or disappointed. Instead, when we can heal those parts, we can start to see the world from a more empowered place, from the point of view of possibility, that not everything is just said and done, and I have no power. I do have some power in every situation. And it could be very quite simply the power to change my mind, the power to choose my perspective. It's like Nelson Mandela, talked about. He was incarcerated, but he what kept him going, my understanding is what kept him going through his incarceration was the poem Invictus. Invictum, that's funny I said that. Invictus. I am the master of my, I think it goes, the end of it is, I am the master of my own fate. I am the master of my own soul. I probably botched that. But it really is a statement of, yes, okay, so I am in prison. And yes, there are these forces around me that I can't control, but I am still a master of myself. And so that's what it's about when we really go ahead and we let go of those old stories and those old identities that may have been comforting and familiar to some extent for many, many years. Inner work does butt into that, but ultimately that's where the power ultimately is when we can say, that's how I felt at the time, that's who I thought I was, but I realized that's not really my truth, that's not really who I am. But at the same time, as I said, honoring that can be a really difficult and painful journey to go on, because it does mean having to really let go of those beliefs and those identities that we really thought that we were. Okay. Finally, well, not quite finally, scared that you'll truly change. That's another fear, scare of really changing. And that also fits with fear of the unknown, because if we've been a certain way, or we've felt a certain way, we've shown up a certain way in our lives, and also maybe other people have seen us that way, and we start to do the inner work, we start to see things differently. We start to behave differently. We start to respond to people differently. We saw, things start to change. We change. Sometimes what can happen is that it unsettles not only our sense of ourselves, but it unsettles other people's perceptions of us. And what comes to mind here is the drama triangle. I'll probably do a whole show about the drama triangle at some point, but it's this triangle that talks about, it's called the Cartman drama triangle. And it's this triangle that talks about the different roles that people play in unhealthy relationships that are really unhealthy and disempowered. And the thing is, if you've baby played one particular spot on that triangle, you've played that role for a long time, and you do the inner work and you actually stop playing that role, well, guess what? The other two might be like, whoa, 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 what's going on? And they want to bring you back on that triangle. They want to bring you back into the drama. And so it can be hard to actually do that inner work such that we change, which changes how we respond in the world and how we show up. And then it can cause other people, it can cause other people to react to us differently. But my point is, though, it can be scary because you might even preemptively like predict that. You might already think, oh, I'm scared to change because what if this happens? What if that happens? What if they think this way? Et cetera. This sounds like a funny thing, but I'll use a small example. I remember when I'm not vegetarian or vegan now. I've gone through phases, but there was a period years and years ago when I realized that for my health, I really wanted to stick to vegetarianism. And I remember it was what was actually hard about it wasn't so much like cutting out meat. It was more the social aspect of it. And obviously I'm not talking about like deep inner emotions here, but really it did trigger some deep inner emotions where I thought, oh no, it's almost like it's going to change some of my rituals or my traditions with my family. If I stop eating meat, I'm almost going to feel like not as much of a sense of connection because they'll all be eating meat and I won't be eating meat. And so I had to go through a process with that too. Luckily, my family was supportive. I mean, I think, but to be honest with you, I think at that point they were sort of like, oh, here goes Emily again with another one of her things. But the point is, that's kind of a smallish example of how even making a change in my diet triggered some of those fears and that sense of almost grief of like, oh, I'm almost like letting go of a certain identity I had before or a certain activities that I used to share with other people. So scared of change, fear of the unknown. And then finally, I want to say fear of your own power. Fear of your own power. It's funny how we oftentimes think that what scares us is our own pain or our own fears or our own, the uncomfortable stuff, the painful stuff, the triggering stuff. That a lot of times we see it as like, or we're afraid of disappointment, which is a huge one. But fear of your own power, and that is actually connected with that whole thing I was saying about identity with victimhood. And having a victim mentality. And by the way, it's amazing how we can not have victim mentality at all in certain areas of our lives and have total victim mentality unconsciously in other areas of our lives. So that's something to remember too. This isn't an all or nothing thing. This can be in certain aspects of our lives where it's like, I feel fully empowered here. I am a strong woman. I am awesome. I've achieved all these things. And yet in this area of my life, I really feel like I don't have any power. I really feel victimized and hurt. And I really feel like I can't make any changes, or it's everybody else's fault. And I'm just sitting here angry and upset about it. Anyway, the point is that oftentimes as we start to address the fact that we've got these disempowered parts of us and really do that inner work, what does start to rise to the surface is our own power. And by the same token, as I said before, about the fear of shining our own light, because maybe there are actually a few reasons I found why people are afraid of their own power. For one thing, there's the fear of shining your light, stepping out there, expressing your power because you've been hurt, attacked, criticized, disappointed, etc. in the past, in those moments when you were shining your light or being your true self. And so there's always that fear, and there are those parts, usually like the inner critics, the controllers, but also the woundeds that carry that fear of, I don't want to do this because I'm afraid this is going to happen. So that can be a big reason why we're scared of our own power. We can also be scared of our own power, however, because maybe there have been times when we have actually used our power thinking we're using it for good and thinking we're using it towards a good result. and in some way or another, it backfired. Maybe something we tried to do for someone else actually had the opposite effect. Maybe we spoke out. In fact, I actually just worked with someone who, like, she said something to her parents when she was a child, and as a result, she thought that it was her fault that her parents got a divorce. So that can be another thing too, where we can learn based on things we say or do that's coming from a place of truth, can have certain effects, ripple effects, impacts, consequences, results, etc., that can cause us to really go, well, maybe I shouldn't do that anymore. Maybe I shouldn't express my power or be in my power because I hurt people with my power. And so there can be those are just a few reasons why we can be scared of our own power, because we're afraid that it would actually backfire or have bad results if we truly do express our own truth and really own our own power. So those are some of the reasons. There are plenty of other reasons why we're afraid of doing the inner work. And those are all, it's valid. I just really want to encourage you in this moment to really ask yourself, would I rather keep living with the pain of getting worse, or would I rather grow through the pain of getting better? I can tell you for myself, I would always rather face the pain, because I know that that is what will lead to growth and healing and me discovering the powers inside of me that I may not have even realized were there, that have been hiding in that darkness, that have been caught in struggle and fear and pain and stress. That as I face that pain, as much as it hurts, as much as I may cry and sob and feel terrible about myself in that moment, I know that as I sit with that, I do my inner work, that ultimately I'm healing. And as I'm healing, I'm helping to heal humanity. I am transforming my own darkness. I'm helping to transform my own darkness back to light, so that I can be more fully present in the world, living my truth, and really, really shining my light and making the difference that I know I'm here to make, from a place of health and wisdom and vulnerability too. That's another thing too, I have to say. All of this requires, when we talk about doing inner work, it requires vulnerability. And a lot of times we think of vulnerability as somehow weakness, but man, oh, is it not? And if you question that, that's fine, but I highly recommend that you look at the work of Brene Brown, if you haven't already, and also to watch her TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability, because there really is so much power in being vulnerable, and it helps us to be fully wholehearted, and I would say whole-lighted, wholly lit, fully lit up, if you will. So I hope this is helpful. As always, please do join us in the ChangeLight community, where I teach you all of these techniques for how to clear all those struggles. I mean, when we're talking about doing inner work, this is what it's about. I realize now that when I talk about inner work, I was mostly focusing on facing the yucky stuff, the negative stuff, the X powers, the darkness. Obviously, inner work involves bringing forward more of your light as well, tuning into those aspects of you that are here to empower you to live your truth, which I talked about in previous episodes. Of course, we talk about M powers at length, but obviously that's part of inner work too. But really, I would say that more of the inner work that's scary has to do with the X powers and the struggles and all of the yucky darkness that we carry, that we're so scared of really facing. I'm telling you right now that, wow, the treasures you will find are just immense and priceless and beautiful, because you are immense and priceless and beautiful. So please do join us in the community.changelight.world, or you can just, if you want to learn more about my work, go to www.changelight.world. Again, my name is Emily. Thank you so much for being here. Mwah! I love you, and I'll see you next week.